actually, I'm going to do one other sort of logistical thing here. Every month, we meet here and we have a free workshop on nature journaling technique. And the idea is that we, Actually, I'm going to tilt this up so that
stops worrying.
Mine does the same thing.
But actually, if I just hold it like this the whole time.
There you go.
That's not the way.
It's okay, don't worry.
What is making that noise?
I can't move.
You can turn it off.
Anyway.
Why do you get
This
up
is
and hold the
this isn't too
same?
distracting for people, but is the breeze helpful?
I'm okay, but everybody else.
There's one in the back. Let's try to leave it out in the front. It's easy.
Yeah, that's a little distracting.
If it gets too hot, let me know. We can put this guy back on. So it is my personal mission to turn the San Francisco Bay Area into a worldwide hub of nature journaling. People connecting with the natural world through keeping a personal journal and sketchbook, using writing and drawing to describe our events, connect us more tangibly with the natural world. I think that keeping a nature sketchbook is the single most effective thing that we can do to train ourselves to observe more deeply and more carefully. And so every month here in this location there's a free nature journaling technique workshop. And every month will be different. And so you keep coming and you'll be developing all these different skills. Sometimes we'll be talking about, how do you draw this sort of detail of birds? Other times it'll be more sort of general introductory topics. And I hope in every class to have stuff for a number of different sort of levels of experience. You don't need to be an artist, you don't need to be a naturalist, but you start doing this on a regular basis and you discover that you turn into an artist and a naturalist. If you already are, well, you'll get there even sooner because you're already there. Today what I want to do is to take a look at some techniques for drawing elements that you commonly find in landscape drawings. So if you're sitting down trying to make a little sketch of a scene in front of you, in other classes we've talked about things of composition and sort of how you frame a picture. But here what I wanted to do is just to take a look at a few of the really common elements that you see in the landscape again and again and again and again. And what are some ways, what are some strategies that we can use to quickly get those down onto the piece of paper that we've got in front of us, accurately, quickly, so we don't really have to fuss around. We commonly see things like grasses, rocks, skies, water, these sorts of things in our landscapes. And in this class we're going to take three different, hey, welcome! We're going to take three different commonly observed subjects and give you a toolkit of how to get those down onto your piece of paper. So for today we're going to take a look at grass, rocks, and forests, specifically coniferous forests. And other days, another day we might do a workshop especially on water and skies. And we'll save oak woodlands for another day. But these are elements that we commonly see in the landscape. I haven't picked the location for our field trip this month. Every month there's also a free nature journaling field trip where we go out and explore together. It's also a potluck lunch, which is very, very tasty. A portable potluck lunch. So we carry that around with us, have a great meal out there, chances to draw and sketch from what we're actually observing in nature. Then we it's a chance also to share our journals and our sketches with other people so you can steal lots of ideas from other people. But today we're going to take a look at these three topics and give you a set of quick ways to get this down into your journal. This is not a formula of like, this is the way you're supposed to draw grass, or this is the way you're supposed to draw rocks. but to give you some general principles and some ideas that you can apply in lots and lots of different ways. And what you want to do is sort of take what is useful personally for you from this and adopt that into your approach, your strategy to drawing. And if there are things that you see here that, like, yeah, that approach really isn't so much for me, don't worry, just let it go. I'll be showing a number of different things for a number of different levels of experience. You ready? So we're going to start with grasses, right? And which seems like, like, that's not spectacular. I don't want to draw, flowers, but you'll find there are fields of grass in just about every landscape that you sit down and you want to do. And here in California, grasslands are a really big part of what we're seeing. I used to draw my grasslands like this, Right, there's my grass. And what I started doing is then just sort of making the little grass symbols get smaller as I went into the background. And partway through I'd get really sick of drawing grass. And also I ended up getting this whole field full of my gray pencil marks. When I'm looking out at this really pale grassland that's in front of me, I've just turned it dark on my paper by drawing in all this grass. So what's a way of dealing with that? Here is an edge of a marsh with tall grasses, or I'm going to be using the term grasses also to include rushes and sedges. My apologies to all the botanists out there. And so if there's stuff that is coming out of the ground or the water right in front of you, yeah, you see places where this blade of grass is coming down, or these are probably sedges probably sticking up in here. And and this is sort of where we get this approach for drawing grasses. I'm coming up out of the ground. But most often when you're looking out at a grassland, you are seeing there's grass there, but you're not seeing where these things really insert. And if I come in here and I make all these little grass marks, it's not going to really feel like what I'm looking at. You also have to spend a lot of graphite drawing in all this grass. So what I do when I'm now drawing a grassland, here's some general thoughts. I want to somehow show this pale zone of grass. What I do is I want to back up for just a moment. Let's take a look at this section of this photo right there. All right? Here I have some grasses that are sticking up. And there is a shadow area behind them. What I want to do when I'm drawing my grasslands is look for places like this where there are these little shadow zones. And what I'm going to be doing in those is on the top edges of it, I might be suggesting the grasses themselves. But on the bottom edge, what I'm doing is I'm coming down and I'm going to be suggesting the grasses that are down here by the shape of the shadow that is on top of them. So I'm going to be carving these grasses down here by the bottoms of these grasses that are up here. And so similarly here, I have a clump of short vegetation here and here. If I'm drawing this, I am drawing that top edge of it by looking at what do I see of it in front of the shadow that is behind it. And so I'm looking for places where there are bumps or little shadow places. And then I'm coming in and I am drawing in those shadows, but as I do, I want to be really aware that I'm carving the top of the bottom edge of what I'm looking at. So here's how that might look with just a pencil. Right? So everybody's used to drawing this stuff up here. What we don't realize is we also have an opportunity to draw the clumps of grass that are below. And we're getting that by where these lines stop and the shape which we are actually making here. Down here in this one, what I did is I took I've got this really expensive drawing tool here. Where is it? Here it is. Now, this cost me a lot. Stolen from the Radisson Hotel. What it is, it's a pen that has been used up, ballpoint pen that no longer has its ink. And I took, just to be extra sure, took that little ink out of it. And what I do, here. I'm drawing here. Let me move this down a little bit. There. Got a little bit better focus. There we go. Oh.
It's got ink.
Yes.
You're back. That's a surprise.
Wow.
The last couple of days, this has been a very cooperative pen. Somewhere it found extra ink. It's interesting. Right, I am going to draw in, pressing rather hard on thick paper, my lines, and then I'm going to grab there you are. One more time. There you go. So I am using those grooves in the paper to help me get some extra lines in there. But even if I'm not doing this embossing thing, just being aware of where I'm bringing my pencil lines down, I want to be aware of that it's usually not going to be an edge coming down like this. So my brain thinking I'm coming down to the ground. I want to think I'm coming down to the top of the next clump of grass. And that, then if I've got, as I'm looking out across my grass lines, I'll see a few of these little clumps of shadows. But with that sort of a texture, it won't get you back out on bare dirt every time you're there. If there is a place like this, right, see where I have a clump of vegetation sticking out here with another clump sticking out in front of it. So if I have roughly a clump of vegetation like this with another one like that, and there's a shadow that is back here, in here I want to be really aware that I'm carving this top edge with the bottom of those strokes. This idea I find really, really helpful in drawing grass. Here is how it looks with watercolor. I can either work around these little spaces with a few strokes, or what I did here is I took a little piece of white crayon and I drew in a few little grasses and put a wash right behind it. And how I got grasses with lighter grasses in front of it. If I want to get a little bit more fancy, I can start with sort of a grassy smudge, jaggeding my bottom edge to be kind of coming down into the grass, and then put my crayon on top of that once it's dry. Then come along with darker paint, and that's what I get. That gives a lot of depth to that without a lot of fussing in the field. By the way, I'm shortly going to be taking all the slides that you see here and putting this online as blog posts. So I'll do a blog post on drawing grasses, a blog post on drawing rocks, and a blog post on drawing coniferous forests. So the slides that you see here, you're going to have free access to those through my blog. Right. Being able to quickly handle some grass, I find really, really useful, and I find lots of different places to put this in. So just in a quick review, I'm going to be drawing the shadows of the clumps of grass. And I'm going to be creating the bright grass that's in front of what I'm looking at, my object. Whether that's the bright grass in front of the clump, or if I've got a dark rock coming down, the bright grass that's in front of it, by the negative shapes of that dark edge coming down. So as you're bringing that dark edge down of either a rock, or bringing that dark edge down of another clump of grass, I want to be carving the shape on the bottom. If you have a hard time visualizing how to do that, initially what you can do is, if you have one of those non-photo blue pencils, you can lightly draw in sort of some places where you want your major kind of grasses to be. And then as you come down, you are filling in these other spaces around them, leaving those places for your, to give you that little suggestion of grass. And finally, working around grass shapes, as we did here, or using that embossing or the resist, which was the crayon. All of those are kind of in a bag of tricks. You don't have to do this anytime. This isn't the only way to draw grass, but these are some tricks that you can have in your quiver that will help your grasslands feel more grassy and get you out of turning your whole field into gray, round, or little gray strokes.
That'll be on your website too, correct?
That'll all be on the website. Absolutely. So knowing that you'll get all the notes for this, while you're here, something that might help is just as we're talking to be making little doodles. Alright, so you can play with some of these ideas, knowing that you will get all these little notes. So as we're kind of going along, you can be just taking little notes, actually doing something active, kind of doodling along with it will help this stuff stick in your head. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at rocks. And I have spent the better part of the last month obsessing about rocks. And it's changed the way that I look at them, and I think I've got some really concrete tricks that I can share with you that'll help you get your rocks to really look like the rocks that you're seeing out there. So, and a lot of it comes from the idea of when we're looking at an object, most of us see its edge. In order to draw rocks, or actually any object, to take our drawings to the next level, we want to train ourselves to start seeing the planes, these surfaces of this rock, and representing those as that there's a change in what is going on with the angle of this surface in our drawing. And there's a bunch of ways that you can do that. So here I'm talking about planes. By planes, what I'm talking about, here I've got a little dodecahedron that I've made. Each one of these surfaces here is a different plane. I want the person who's looking at this to be able to visualize those planes. But I have to do that on a two-dimensional sheet of paper. Right? We're not going to have 3D glasses. So I have to trick this person into seeing that depth and seeing those planes where there aren't any. So I'm going to start with just a few general observations about ways to kind of make these planes show up. And it'll get more sophisticated, and in the end, I'm going to hit you with my new discovery, which I think has really made all the difference for me. So way number one is just on the edges of these planes, I'm going to put a line. Right? I can, if my rock is several planes, I look at sort of what is the edges of those planes. So if this is my rock, maybe it has one plane down here, it has another that is coming like that, maybe it has another one here, it has another one here. I can draw little lines at the edges of those. It makes my rocks a little bit cubist, but this is one way of suggesting those planes. There's a relationship to what is going on with this plane, with where I see changes in the outline here. So I want to pay attention to what I see with that. Come down. Another thing I can do is suggest these edges by changes in the value, the darkness, on either side of those lines. So here, without really paying attention to anything else, just I'm putting dark on one side. If there's dark on one side, I'm putting light on the other. That's helping these edges pop out more than these edges. But here I'm just randomly putting these in. If you're looking at a rock out there in the field, it's going to be having direct sunlight on it. And the sunlight will cast shadows. Paying attention to where my shadows go, where they make darks and lights, is also going to really help carve my object. Another thing that's really neat that shadows do, look at this shadow here going out across the ground, and it hits this plane of this object here. It changes its angle when it hits another object. So when the shadow goes up over a different plane, you're going to see that shadow of that object change. So if there was a shadow of a tree coming up across this thing here, right, that tree shadow might be doing something like that. So that shadow changes as it goes across my object. Now I want to take a look at the sort of marks and lines I'm making inside this object. Here, I'm just making lines in any random direction and just am interested in value. Sometimes I really want to show a certain texture in there. If that's the case, all right, that's fine, but these lines don't tell me anything about the angle of these planes. Because I've got the same sort of line work going on here, 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 here. Right? If, however, I'm using a set of parallel lines, and they have a change in direction when you get to a different plane, that's going to suggest to the viewer that there's something else going on here. And this is what I was doing for a long time. And something I started to notice is that sometimes the angles that I would put these lines in would really, really work to me at sort of showing that plane, and sometimes they wouldn't. but I couldn't figure out what is the general rule of what I was looking at. Until I made this little dodecahedron. And what I did is I made a white dodecahedron and I just started drawing on it with different lines and started to sort of see what felt the best. And what I came on eventually is, you can pass this around the room. This dodecahedron has lines printed on it in such a way that if you were to put a water drop on any surface and it flowed downhill, it would be following that line. So the straightest way downhill on any of these points is following that line straight down. But notice as you turn it at different angles, the direction of what downhill is changes.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this made me realize, okay, there's something really good going on here. So what I did is I took this little model and I put it on the back of my toilet tank. And just left it there for a couple of weeks. And every day I'd have my little time and I would just sit there and I would close one eye and look at it until I developed this intuitive sense about what is going on here. And my brain absorbed these angles. And now it's easy for me to reproduce them when I'm drawing something on an object. So what I'm going to do is on my website, I'm going to put the blueprints for this dodecahedron. Something that you cut out, it's got little fold-in tabs, you tape it together. Taping is easier than gluing. And then the gluing looks better though. So you can tape it all together and then drop it on the back of your toilet tank. Just play with it. Give it, a couple of minutes a day for a week. And your brain will absorb, pass this around, and just close one eye and look at it and sort of see like, oh yeah, hold your hands in the angles that you're actually physically do this with your hands and sort of see like, oh yeah, at that angle, that's what's going on with those lines. The sort of direction of the water drop is what has really made a difference for me. Compare this with this. Do you see how these lines are now really working for you, suggesting what is going on? This is now what I'm really, really honing in on my rock drawings. So when I'm doing shading on my rock, as much as I can, I'm demonstrating with my little shading strokes what plane I'm on by the direction of those strokes. If I've blended everything and the strokes don't show up, then no big deal. But if the strokes show through, I'm going to make them work for me. So there's one other thing, and that is, if there is a crack running across the rock, or if there's a vein of some material going through the rock, I have the same thing going on that I was seeing with, very similar to what was going on with those shadows, where as that crack goes over one of the edges, so it goes from one plane to another plane, it's going to change directions. That crack or that vein is going to change directions. So if it goes over 3, it's going to go in 3 different directions. And you don't have to memorize some formula like, well, if hypothetically we're coming from this angle on a octahedron, which way? You're sitting there and there's a rock in front of you. You just have in your brain this general idea that my crack, as I'm going across these different planes, I'm going to expect it to change directions. And then I just look at what the...
Yeah, you can almost see like a plane kind of cutting through it.
Exactly. You want to visualize, if we were to take this cube, you can actually go home, take an apple, works pretty well, cut the apple so that it's in a cube, and then get out a big knife and go, right? And cut it at some oblique angle. Put those two sides back together, and it will make, then you start looking at it at different angles, and you go like, oh, look at how those change. Right, so you're visualizing a plane that goes, right? This one is coming through that one there. This one is going, right? This one here is going, pretty cool. Let's put all these ideas together onto a rock. Whoa, so this rock looks like it has volume, right? What are the tricks why does it look that way? Let's deconstruct it.
The lines change direction?
Alright, so I've got these lines working for me saying, alright, there's changes in these planes. So those line direction things help you say, look, this is on a different angle than this. And I'm intentionally doing that water drop thing.
Values.
Okay, values. Values. And notice that the value scale, there's not a lot of values here, but I'm being really intentional of where there is a change between these angles. This happens to be a different value than that. So it's not a big, I mean, this is a really limited value palette. Right?
I think first you determine your planes.
The what?
First you determine your planes and then you do the other.
Yes. She says, first you determine what your planes are. Alright? And then, so then I sort of shaded that in. Then I dropped my cracks in across. And look at how the cracks go across these. So if I've got this little thing raised up here, the crack comes across, drops down, then out across, drops down. So the cracks are also helping you wrap your way around this rock. I also have the shadow working for me. Right? Notice that these shadow lines are, by being horizontal, suggest that this is resting on a flat surface. If they were out at a different angle, it would suggest a sloped surface.
I like how you can see that it's resting on a larger piece of bedrock too because of your cracks that are in there.
Yeah. So what helps with that is this, and yeah, then these cracks kind of coming into it. Same thing going on here.
With grass.
With grass. And look at how I'm doing that little grass trick. Look at the shadow coming down here into this grass. The top edge of the grass is made by the end of that shadow. Ooh, where have we seen that before? Right? So what are the other things going on here?
I see a lot of brightness where the sun's coming.
Yeah. So I'm letting these flat surfaces here that are facing the sun, so there's a lot of brightness here. I'm not confusing that with all sorts of other shading. So again, a very simple value scale.
Yeah.
Simple value scale. Look what goes on with those lines. I've got a shelf down, going out on a little shelf and then down. Notice the correspondence between what is going on with those shading lines and that edge. So out here, flat shelf, we start to go down. Here is the continuation of that shelf in here. We come out here. Look at this, the angle of these lines changes in here. Saying water drop comes like that. And these drawings will be up on the web.
Okay.
Right?
Cool.
But, you know, it looks like, and so then about also, you know, the cracks wrapping around it, all those things really work together. There's another kind of fun thing going on right here that helps give a lot of depth to this rock. Now, see these little places where a lizard might hide? Right? These little dark points, there's a special name for these. It's called snodgrassing. Snodgrassing. So this rock has been snodgrassed. Right? So Snodgrass was an illustrator who kind of figured out that if he had two lines that were coming together making a close view like this, he would just sort of cut off that inside section and put a little divot of a shadow right there. Right? Take a look, that's all I'm doing right here. And what's happening is this little crack of rock, that's more easily eroded because it's being eroded from both sides. So snodgrassing actually happens in nature. This part is more vulnerable to breaking off.
So did Snodgrass only do it for rocks, or did he did it for everything?
I think it was originally on bugs. I think that's right.
Like carapace of a insect.
Yeah.
Like the joints of the legs and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where these things would come together, you can punch that in and pow. Now I've got to warn you about snodgrassing. Snodgrassing is addictive, right? So like you start snodgrassing and you're getting this like this
Leads to harder grasses.
rush.
I use way too much pencil.
Yeah, you just got, it's fun, right? So you put it in like, ooh, that felt good. Ooh, I'll do another. Ooh, that felt even better, right? And you start doing it, and then all of a sudden, right now the snodgrassing is a few accent points. But you keep going on, and it's like the chocolate chips in a
Straight
cookie.
to the mind.
The whole thing is covered with all of these. Then there is no accent point, right? So my suggestion is at the start, play with it on some little studies and just go wild with snodgrassing. So your brain incorporates it into the fabric of what you do. Let yourself go wild on snodgrassing. So you kind of can get it out of your system, and then you can use restraint when you're doing your other drawings. But have some fun drawings where like, I'm going to just throw another crack over here, I'm going to connect it with another crack, now I'm going to snodgrass over there, I'm going to do it over here, and then kind of look at it and you're going to go like, oh yeah, that is pretty excessive snodgrassing. And you'll see that they kind of lose their impact when there's too many of them. So I'm letting this part drop back with a deeper shadow, picking out these bright edges by putting something dark behind them there. But what I really wanted to point out on this slide was this. Let's take a look at this rock for a while, right? It looks like a fairly complex subject. You can sort of see a rock. You can feel what that rock is doing in it. You think that like, there's a lot of complex stuff going on here. Let's sort of simplify this rock for just a moment. And in our heads, what we're going to do is we're going to just, here is our rock, right? And what I'm going to do is just have a rock with horizontal, vertical sort of shadowing, suggesting this is a flat surface towards me here. That then is a simple rock, right? But what I'm doing here is I then am carving into that a white wedge right there. I'm bringing a wedge of white into that dark shadow. And up in here, I'm bringing a wedge of dark into the light shape. So what I do is I find that very often, if here's my object and there is, some shadow across it, there will be places where the dark will wedge out into the light. There will be places where the light will wedge out into the dark. I'm going to look for those light and dark wedges, and that does a tremendous amount to carve this rock. So those light and dark wedges, it goes from being sort of a boring edge like this to a really interesting edge like this, because this one has a dark wedge that jumped out. One last thing to note here is that if I take this shadow away, it feels like this rock is floating. The minute I put that shadow in, that rock is stuck to the earth.
I feel like the overhang.
Mm-hmm.
Like the shadow is kind of going down, so it looks a little bit like it's on a slope surface.
Yeah. Or I can even suggest that it's on a grassy slope right in there. So let's do a little step-by-step here. Can you see this in the back? There's a very pale non-photo blue line suggesting the shape of this rock. So what I'll do when I'm drawing a rock is I'll first look up at the rock and what is the shape of that rock. I'm getting the positions of the different rocks in this cluster organized. I'm making my job of drawing easier because I don't have to do everything at the same time. Later on, I'll be drawing in details on this rock, and I don't have to be thinking while I'm drawing those details of how tall is it, and where does this next rock overlap it. I've already figured that stuff out with my non-photo blue pencil. So now what I'm going to allow myself to do is to focus on other things. I'm going to compartmentalize this process of drawing. So first I'm looking at where are the major objects, how big are they, how tall are they, how wide are they. Often with a boulder, it doesn't really make that much of a difference if you kind of got its shape a little bit wrong. But sometimes, you're drawing this particular boulder that's in Yosemite Valley. And yeah, you really want to get the sense of that boulder. Right? You're up there on Olmsted Point looking at this amazing erratic boulder out there. You want to draw that one? You pay attention to that shape. So I'll block that in with my non-photo blue pencil. And I'll also block in the edges of its major planes, like you were suggesting. And I'll also often indicate with my pencil what is the edge of the shadow, which usually falls along the boundary between two planes. And then I'll just get out my graphite pencil and draw on those lines. I look at my little non-photo blue pencil line saying where my shadow is, and I start to draw in my shadow, but I am using those sets of parallel lines to suggest those planes of the rock. And the rock starts to carve in front of me. Here I'm kind of making these lines particularly kind of wide and bold to sort of emphasize that. If I was drawing this just for my own little sketching, it'd probably be a little bit more subtle with just a little bit showing through. This looks a little bit like kind of, prison bars, because I'm making them so bold, but this is for demonstration purposes. I think this is useful. So I probably, normally in my sketch, wouldn't have quite this kind of jailhouse rock look. Thank you. So here's my jailhouse rock, but now what I want to do is I'm going to look for those wedges. And I remember, I've got my major shadows in here. I've got one wedge on here. This rock looks really cool. The reason it does is because there's a wedge. So I'm going to look at this. Is there actually a wedge somewhere out in here that I'm missing? Either a wedge of light going into the dark or dark going into the light. And if I put those in. Right? And now this rock is really looking interesting. So intentionally look for those wedges. The next step, when I push the button, it's going to feel like I did a whole bunch of stuff. But all these lines will still be here exactly like this. But all I will have done is just come across it and drawn in some cracks. So if I've got a crack that was coming up here, right, and came across here, it would then come up like this. Then maybe that crack comes up here. Maybe it's going to go up like that. And here is another crack. I'm going to Snodgrass. So I'm going to just starting to carve some cracks across this rock. But as I'm going around it, I'm trying to visualize when am I going up on a plane, when am I going across a flat surface. These cracks are going to be following those things. So let's take this same rock now, this rock on crack. Right? So I'm coming out, I'm coming down. I connected that with another crack and Snodgrass. This rock came out, it came down. I had another crack over here and Snodgrass. I think I got a little bit carried away with my Snodgrassing.
I like it.
Could have been worse though. Right?
And you see a face in the rock too.
Oh, you do? Is that his nose?
And part of it is there. And there's eyes right there, and the same circle, I see eyes, round eyes, and that same circle.
It's kind of a pig face here.
Yes.
To the eyes, the nose.
Oh, yeah.
How are you doing that?
Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little hint of texture. I'm going to add a little bit of texture to these rocks. Now with texture, that's detail. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of detail on here. I don't want to cover this thing with detail. I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of detail, and a little bit goes a long way. On this, if this is an object, and this part of it is in shadow, right? The place where you're going to see the most texture, where the glancing light here, is in this zone right here across that shadow light edge. So like those, have you ever seen those pictures of the faces of the moon that show all the craters? Right? You can see like the shadows and all those. Those pictures are not taken during a full moon. What they do is they take a slice of the moon when it's in a crescent, and they take that, and then they take the next slice of the moon, they splice that together so that they always get this glancing light. They splice all those together, and they get that full portrait of the moon.
Whoa.
Right? And otherwise, it would just be, you wouldn't see a lot of those craters because the light would just wash everything out. right? Because the light is coming straight on it. So this zone in here is where I'm going to find most of my texture. Right? So my texture in here is just some random scratches and dots. All right? I'm just letting my pencil play. I'm going to go kind of, then I'm going to come right? And you get those sort of random things. What I want to avoid is kind of regular placement of dots across it like dice, right? I want to be regularly irregular. My rocks are feeling pretty sassy right now, but they still feel like they're going to float away. So I'm going to ground them in by adding some shadows down here to connect these rocks into the ground here. So I'm going to lock them into the ground with some shadows. Right? Notice the same kind of grassland trick. Right? And I was about ready to walk away, but very often it's a good idea to get really kind of back up from your drawing. And I realized I think I wanted a little bit more darkness in these shadows on this part of the rock. Maybe on this one where there's a cast shadow here. So I just pumped my shadows a little bit more, and I couldn't help myself, I added in a bird. So when we look at it, we're like, oh my gosh, how would you do that? But we deconstruct it, and we see that this is made up of steps where there are specific, discrete things that I'm intentionally doing. All right? And I can apply those to any object that I'm doing. So my, if this is my rock, and I've kind of blocked it in, depending on what direction my sunlight is coming from, right, I can sort of take something and kind of think to myself, like, which way are these lines going to be going? Maybe this one casts a shadow out onto this rock here. Hard to get real good sort of shading effects with a marker on the whiteboard here. But you sort of see where I'm going with this. And then I want to crack it. Crack come across here, down, out. It's going to come down here, and it's going to go into two cracks and a snodgrass right there. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll take this part here and kind of pop that up a little bit so that depending on which angle you put your sunlight from and where you sort of carve your lines, you can take those same rocks and turn them into all sorts of different things. But the same basic principles apply. Start simple and start adding in wedges. Look at that. That little wedge just added a lot, didn't it?
This would be an easy exercise. Just create some random outline shape on your page and then start making a rock out of it.
You bet.
It's difficult to make them all three the same though. The same outline would be difficult to draw 3 times.
Should I put up on my webpage a template with this rock multiple times?
Sure. That'd be cool.
Would you use it?
Yeah.
All right. For you, I'll hook you up. I'm going to have myself busy when I get home. All right, so this is just to say nature really does do snodgrassing. Right? Look at how those cracks help define the planes. Look at the simple value scale here. We're not getting fussy with kind of shading 50 shades of gray. We basically got dark and light and really dark. And even though these are rounded rocks, we're still seeing really distinct planes. So train yourself to look for planes. And when you see a crack in a rock, you just go, ah, thank you, right? Because that really helps you start to carve this thing in a really fun way. And that is fun with rocks. So we looked at learning to see planes. Even rounded boulders have planes. Use simple, I'm not going to do the thing where people just sort of stand in front of their slide and read it off, because there's all my points. But this is kind of the bullet points of what we just did. See if those make sense to you? You don't have to do all of these. This isn't the only way to draw rocks. This isn't the right way to draw rocks. But these are additional tricks that you can have in your bag of tricks, in your quiver, to help you be able to draw rocks. And this doesn't just apply to rocks. Right? We here have been looking at rocks and all these planes and things. But this idea of looking at planes, that applies to anything. A human face, right? A bird, a deer walking across a meadow has planes on its body. We have a tendency to over-round everything. But you start looking at it and you realize, oh, that, you could sort of carve that in. We get so into the kind of over-rounding and thinking of things as rounded shapes that we miss the planes that make up their bodies. But you start to add planes in, see the planes on the bird that you're drawing. And it will get a solidity that just sort of a general blending shading will miss. That's the new challenge. And finally, we're going to take a look at drawing a coniferous forest. And what I want to do is to use this as an example of how to draw something with a whole bunch of detail. But instead of getting bogged down in the detail, I'm going to back up and focus on the basic shape. There's a few places where I'm going to intentionally use a little bit of detail. And my brain can run into trouble because it knows that this forest is made out of a lot of trees. Right? And so we often do, when we look at the forest, is we start drawing a whole bunch of trees. But what I'm going to suggest to you is when I look out at a forest, perhaps there might be one tree that's in front, or maybe a couple of trees that have nobody else in front of them. I can see that it's like, oh, it's really well lit, there's a little tree right there. But most of the forest is going to be all these leaves and branches intermingling with a few kind of cool treetops sticking up, and it's a chunk, it's a forest. I want to draw the forest as a unit. Right? So I'm going to draw the forest. The trick is not to draw the trees. Draw the forest. So let's take a look at how we draw a forest. I'm going to start the same way that I always do. I bust out my non-photo blue pencil, and I'll place in, like, I'm going to have a row of trees over here. I'm going to have some bigger trees kind of coming in here. Down in front of them in this zone, I'm going to put some smaller trees, and in the back, some very distant trees going up on a hillside and a meadow in front. I'll place my basic elements with my non-photo blue pencil. So to say, is that what I'm seeing? Okay, yes, go. Now, there's one place where I kind of slow down in this process and kind of put in a little bit of detail. And that is in creating the top edge of the forest. If there's a gray mass here, people will read that as a stone monolith. If it has a top like this and it's a gray mass, they'll read that as a forest. Because this says to everybody, hey, that's trees down below. So I want to pay attention to the shapes on the top, and in this I'm also going to do the same thing of avoiding symmetry. I don't want this dog tooth stand of trees. It looks like a Christmas tree farm, looks like dragon's teeth. Right? I don't want that. I want to, once again, be consistently inconsistent. Right? Sometimes bigger tree, sometimes a skinnier tree, sometimes a littler tree, sometimes a little pointy tree. All right? They're varied in their spacing. They're varied in their size, in how wide they are and how leafy they are. And there isn't like a right way to draw tops of pine trees. Because a lodgepole looks really, really different than a ponderosa at the top. It looks very different than a Monterey pine tree. And what you want to do is sort of stand there and kind of squint at it and come up with your little scribble for getting the tops of whatever type of tree you're looking at. But that's a good place. If you are going to slow down, you're going to do that there. Then I'm going to also put in a line along the bottom of that forest for the trees that are in the bushes that are up close to me. The thing that's different here is look at how I'm doing this versus that. Here, my little lines, I'm drawing the tree. And here what I'm doing, you'll see why in just a moment, I'm drawing a line around the tree. I'm not actually drawing the tree here. I don't want this red line to be part of my tree. I want the white on the inside to be part of my tree. Here, the red is my tree. Here, the white inside my tree. The white on the inside is my tree. Because my next step is just to put a wall of tone in the background. So I get these then standing out as the white shapes being the trees that are in front. And these being, see that difference? So I'm going around the tree for that thing in the foreground, that light object in front of the dark. But on that tree, if I had gone, and actually given it a little tree-like shape on the top, then when I put all that stuff in the background, I would have lost it. So instead, I had preserved it by making a little shape around it, so I get a white tree against a dark background. Another thing that I'm doing here, kind of subtle, is that I don't want to have a really big hard edge here with then some coloring inside of it. I want this to look as one unified mass. So on my shading here, which is horizontal, I'm coming up and pushing enough so that I don't get a really hard edge up here with kind of light inside of it. Then that edge is really going to stand out. You see how I lose that edge?
Do you have any tips for drawing the line of the outside of the tree? Because mine just looks like a heartbeat gram.
Did we get this thing?
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So thought number one is say goodbye to these symbols. All right. It is hard to make them up out of your head. What does really help is to get yourself outside and start looking at real trees and say, or you can just get on the web and bring up, type in lodgepole pine. All right. Do a Google image search. Here comes the lodgepole pine. And kind of go like, oh, that's really what a lodgepole pine does. And then what you can do is you can look at the tree and just try this exercise for a while. You look at the tree and you, over here with your pen, you don't look down at your paper, and you get your pen to make little marks that are what you're seeing. And what you're trying to do is absorb lodgepoleness out of that. This looks a little bit too furry, right? And that kind of gets you out of that sort of stylized shape. But looking at a bunch of trees and just sort of, when you're out there in the field, kind of like, okay, what are you doing? That's that kind of, because otherwise you don't have any other model in your head, and all your brain jumps to is that. Right? Because it says, oh, you want a tree? I can give you a tree. Okay. So, should I turn on the fan for a little bit?
Sure.
People are starting to melt. So friends at home, we're sorry about this extra noise, but it's really hot in here. Is that better? Okay. So I'm going to speak louder. You think this is so good for video? All right.
Yeah.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, just to play with these trees in the foreground a little bit, I'm going to add a little bit, I'm going to ground these shrubs with a little bit of solidity at their base, a little bit of a shadow, a hint of branchiness going up into them. I'm not going to draw branches all the way up into them because the further up you get, it becomes obscured by leaves. I'm also going to pop a few holes into this tree back here, places where I'm seeing through clumps of foliage and vegetation. Oh, no, that's not what I'm going to do at all. Never mind. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. All right. So the next thing, right, at this point, we kind of read this as forest, but it's not full-on forest yet. So there's one more step that is really going to push it over the edge and make this feel like forest. And you can do it really, really quickly. But the trick is not to look at it as drawing trees. What I'm going to be doing is drawing the shapes next to the trees. So if I have a tree here, and I have a tree here, that makes a triangle between them. What I'm going to be doing is coming down and drawing triangles down into this forest. Right? And as I do, that creates the shapes of the rest of the trees. So all I did is I pushed down little triangles like this with rough edges, and that makes for little clumps of branches. I'm just coming down, kind of going, oh, that kind of looks like a branch. But again, I want to avoid making them all evenly the same size. There's one problem that people can get into with this. There we go. So let's say I have on screen. There you go. All right, so let's say I have, here are some little tree shapes. There's a dead tree.
You're off camera.
Are we back?
Yep.
Let me know if I stray again. And then I'm going to make put some sets of just some horizontal lines in here.
Your head's obscuring what you're drawing. There you go.
There you go.
And now you're off camera. Other way. There you go.
And we're back. Alright? So here's a problem I can get into. I start putting down these little triangles, and instead of kind of looking like
You're just a little bit off. Just a tiny bit.
There you go.
Awesome.
instead of looking like shadows, they look like carrots hanging from the top edge, right? So the reason that they look like carrots is because there's a big jump in value between this and that. I want them to be close enough in value that our brain will see them together as one unified mass. So if I get the carrot effect, I'm going to make my trees a little bit darker. Whoa, hold still. Let's see if I can. Whoa. Sorry for making everybody seasick. Shouldn't be that hard. There we go. Alright. So now the carrot effect is gone because I pushed up the value. these sorts of things. So if those downward facing triangles are really dark and the background is really light, you'll get the carrot effects. The carrots will pop out as the positive shape. You want them to recede as the negative shape so that the trees are the positive shape. If the carrots are popping forward, then you're not seeing the trees. So you push up the value of the rest of the trees, and all of a sudden those shadows drop back, and you have your forest. So we're just playing with what becomes what's positive, what's negative shape. Yeah? Oops. Right now, so you see how those trees are popping out, but I actually wasn't intending to draw this tree. I was just kind of going, oh, another tree, cool. Oh, another tree. And those horizontal lines that I had in here, some of them on those lines, there were paler areas, right? Because those are kind of scribbling like this. Some of those now show up as lighter branches in my trees. That wasn't intentional. That's just because I'm going like that, and I'm making my carrots. So I popped my holes in here, rounded these. For the background back here, I'm going to be doing the same thing, but this time instead of horizontal shading, I'm going to do it with my initial shading was vertical. And I'm going to have it be lighter. Here, if any of my line work shows up, we'll find that as a suggestion of branches. Back here, if any of my line work shows up, we'll see that as a suggestion of trees. Same thing, a few little triangles, dropping down a few triangles into there. And I finally, just as I grounded this, I put in this little shadow back here and it grounded that forest. This approach is really, really fast. A lot faster than drawing tree, 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 tree. I can draw a big zone of forests. And it will feel like a unified mass of vegetation, as opposed to drawing a bunch of little separate trees. We'll take a look at one more demonstration. Can anybody name the location?
Yosemite.
Where in Yosemite?
Valley,
It's,
Which valley?
Yosemite Valley.
this is as you're leaving Yosemite. The creek as you're leaving Yosemite.
So you're leaving Yosemite heading east or west?
Heading west.
So this is actually, so in Tuolumne Meadows, numbered no back there. So, here we go. Same thing going on. I've got my tree shapes back here. Going further back in space, I have less detailed tree shapes, even less detailed tree shapes back here. But I'm still trying to be consistently inconsistent. Look at that. You would not want an EKG rhythm like that. Right? That's trouble. The trees that are in the front, I'm drawing around the tree. And then I put in dark. So all I've done here is on this part back here, I've shaded that in horizontally, and the ones in the background, it's vertical, getting more pale as I go further back. Notice that down here, as I brought this shading down, I didn't want to lose the darkness of these tree tips here. So I made my shading just kind of peter out a little bit. Look at how that tree shows up now. And it doesn't show up really with that line around the outside edge because I made the background color kind of match that. This is showing up a little bit too much for my liking. But I'm not going to lose sleep over it. From there, going to drop my triangles down. And look at how from here to there, all of a sudden, a little bit of grounding, right? Triangles and grounding. On the one that's further back, I'm not pushing my values as much. And you very quickly get a sense of the forest. Then, showing, looking for those cracks, those wedges, vertical planes, showing them with that. So just those same tricks which we were doing with the rock drawing before. Lambert Dome is a big rock. I'm just not going to put much detail into it because I don't want it to pop into the foreground. If I put a lot of contrast and detail into this, Lambert Dome would feel like it's out here. It would flatten the drawing out. So to keep a sense of depth, I'm going to have less detail in there. And sometimes it's really hard to do. You're just in love with that big piece of granite. And you want to draw every little hiker, climber, tree that you see on it. But let yourself have the stuff that's in the background be less detailed and lighter. For the foreground, notice I'm doing that familiar grass trick over here. There's a little wedge going into that rock, grounding some of those boulders here in the middle of the stream. And to show that the water is a flat surface, my lines suggesting water are horizontal. So you're seeing me use a whole bunch of the tricks again and again and again and again. In this drawing, this is all done with drawing strategies that we've looked at in this talk. Yeah?
I know that we're not doing water today, but I'm looking at your water and I have a question.
Yes?
I'm assuming that it's light near the foreground and dark in the background because that we're close to where we see the light reflecting off of the water, and that it gets darker in the background because it's maybe more in the shadow of the trees or something like that. But it's sort of like it works, of course, but it just kind of is a little bit backwards in my brain from things that are further away or lighter.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of it's just what you see and
yes, you're
what the
absolutely
light
right.
is.
So having some rules of thumb, things getting pale in the background, is a great rule of thumb. And then what you want to do is look at what is really happening in this place. And when nature disagrees with the rule of thumb, believe nature.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Back here, this stuff was more in shade. Out here, I had light bouncing more directly off of these things, giving me sort of bright, blue in here. And putting up the little value finder. Did you get one of those? Okay. So putting up that little value finder, looking at where is it dark, where is it light, also really, really helps. I could stop right here, and I've got a pencil sketch that really didn't take very much time that gives me a good sense of being out there in Tuolumne Meadows. If I want to, we'll save this for another time when we do our little workshop on drawing water, drawing skies. I can bust out my watercolor kit and start to have fun with it. So I just dropped in a wash in the sky. Over here, something that's just sort of a preview of stuff from our upcoming class on water. Thank you for joining us. Is that very often when you get into the shallows close to you, you'll see really warm colors there in the rocks. So a rock that sticks out can be really pale. That same kind of rock in the water, you'll see these really warm colors. And it's weird to let yourself put an ochre, rusty brown into the water, but just start looking at the water and you'll start to see this again and again. And eventually you'll be like, oh, I'm going to give it a try.
How come it didn't turn green? What did you do to prevent it from turning green?
You'll see it's turning green a little bit in here, but what I did is that this came across, and then you'll see that this blue is starting to blend out more and more and more. The blue disappeared by the time you got to here. And then I put the brown in this way. You see it does turn a little bit green there. This is, because it's sort of more of a red brown, it's going to go towards sort of a gray purple more than turning green. I dropped color. The part that is closer to me, I did first while my brush was really charged up. Then my brush was running out of paint, and I did a few strokes in the background here, which gives me a sense of more vivid color close to me, and less so as, but it still felt a little bit too vivid green for me. So I dropped in some shadows with purple, and hit that with a little bit of brown. For the trees, what you're going to see in the next slide is I just came along and I mixed up a kind of greenish olivey color, a greenish brown color, and painted it across all of those background trees. And back here, sort of added a little bit more purple into it, so there's sort of a purplish, brownish gray, and painted that over those distant trees. All one value, all of the variation in light and dark tones, which you'll see in the trees in the next picture, is just because of the pencil work. So I just hit that with a wash. My values were already done, and I got this. Alright, so just stroke, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm not in there kind of painting trees. I already had my darks and lights. I let that be the darks and lights of my trees and just hit that wash. Put some shadows on the mountain. And then brought in some greens, some warm colors into those foreground trees. I thought I was done. I walked away from it, and I felt that this was a little bit too abrupt. It didn't sort of feel like these trees and this mountain were really part of the same thing. So something that you can do with watercolor that's really wonderful is the idea of unifying a part of the picture. So what I did is I mixed up a little bit of kind of off purple, and I put that over part of this mountain as a shadow, brought that same wash into these trees and down into these trees right here. And that kind of, by having that same little bit of paint in all those sort of things, it locks those together. And so you can say, these feel like a little bit too disjunct, right? But I can unify things with that little wash. I also dropped a little shadow into this tree. Same purple. So we've looked at a bag of tricks for some common elements that you find in landscape drawings. You'll see these again and again and again. But the tricks we've been looking at are not limited to the subjects which we've applied them in. We really looked at the idea of negative space when we were looking at grass. That's an incredibly useful way of thinking about parts of your drawings that you can apply to lots of things other than grass. We looked at the idea of planes, carving an object when we looked at rocks. But planes is not isolated and specific to rocks. The idea of looking at planes you can apply to anything that you're looking at, and it will strengthen your drawing. And lastly, when we're looking at the coniferous forest, we were looking at sort of drawing the chunks, the big units that you see, even though your brain knows that that is made out of little trees. When I'm drawing the forest, I draw the forest instead of the trees. Similarly, when we have a little workshop on drawing trees, we'll discover that we don't draw the leaves. We're actually drawing the tree. If you get lost in drawing leaves, it doesn't feel like a tree. If you get lost in drawing trees, it doesn't feel like a forest. I don't want everybody to think that this is the way you should be drawing, but I do want to increase the range of tools that you have available to you. What happens when you take a little workshop like this is for a brief period of time, these ideas are going to be fresh and accessible in your head. But your brain is very quickly doing a calculus of, is this essential for my survival? And if not, I'm going to take this information and I'm going to wipe it from the slate. I want to make room for other sort of stuff. So if you would like to keep this available and accessible information to you, what I suggest you do is in the next several days, start using it, just as little experimental studies. Do some little thumbnails of a coniferous forest. If you're not in a place where you have access to one, do a little Google search. Do a little study on one right there. Do some little studies of things that you can see outside your window in your garden, and try to use these basic principles. It doesn't have to be drawing a rock. If you can find yourself ways of thinking about using discovering planes on any object that you're doing, play with that. And what you'll find is if you start using it, you're going to make room in your brain to kind of hang on to these ideas so that you'll be able to use that whenever you want. In future workshops, we'll look at other different topics, other subject area, and also kind of give you other sort of general applicable skills for drawing. But the single most important thing you can do is just start drawing on a regular basis. If it's not in your regular habits right now to be drawing all the time, that's okay. Cut yourself some slack, but be intentional about where in your schedule are you going to find the time to do that. At the start, it's going to feel forced. It's going to feel awkward to be drawing because you haven't been drawing on a regular basis. When you start yourself doing it on a regular basis, it becomes your habit, it becomes your routine. And then, if you get to the end of the day and you haven't been sketching and drawing, you'll be feeling like, oh man, I gotta get my pencils out. I want to draw. There's something that you want to do. You don't have to force yourself to do it. So, Lena, about how many times a week would you find yourself busting your pencils out and drawing?
At least 4 to 5. It was 7. Now it's gone down to 4 to 5.
So she was doing it every day. Now it's 4 to 5 times a week. Right? That's great. Right? But if she takes her drawing supplies and she hides it away in some closet, it's going to be much less likely that she does it. So she's got her stuff out, accessible all around the house, doing it all the time. Make room in your own schedule and see what you can do. I will be posting these ideas also as blog posts, so you'll be able to see all those things. And if you liked what you saw here, Ashok has been, thank you so much for videotaping it. We'll have this online as a video that you can get a refresher from. Also, if you have friends who you think would be interested in learning these skills and developing themselves, nobody's behind because you haven't done these other workshops. Invite your friends to come join us, see if this is something that they want to do. And thank you for being a part of what we've got going on here. You bet. Also, if you like what we're doing here and would like to support that, I want to encourage people to consider a donation to support the Bay Area Nature Journal Club. On my website, there's a place where people can make tax-deductible donations to support what we're doing here. All the programs are, including the field trips and our workshops, are free. We just are very grateful for the support of people that have supported us in the past. Or I should say I am. And I look forward to that continuing in the future. But don't feel that if you can't make a donation that you shouldn't come. Everybody should come. Nature journaling is a great, low-cost way of connecting yourself with nature. And if you're feeling any financial hardships, it is a really terrific way of really still connecting yourself with the natural world in a way which will not burn through your pocketbook. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Question?